Right. I thought in this video, I thought I would talk about something a little bit dear to my heart, and that is Jiu Jitsu. So I have a blue belt here. I got this a few years ago. And one of my favorite things was to go into what we called back then submission tournaments. So basically, there was no points for takedowns, chokeholds, arm bars, all that kind of stuff. You either got to win, or it went to a draw, or you got tapped out. I remember one tournament, I'm trying to think how many people, there was over 100 people at this tournament. And in this particular tournament, I was the only one out of all the divisions that tapped everyone out, submitted everyone. Every opponent that I had, I submitted. There is a huge correlation between submissions and closing. So in jiu-jitsu, a submission is basically when you are able to make the person give up, either willingly or if they pass out, or if their arm gets broken or their ankle or whatever it is. But I'm very proud to say I never broke anybody's arm intentionally. So how can I tie submission jiu-jitsu to closing? Well, in sales, what people always gravitate towards is closing everyone. That's the goal. Obviously, you need a contract, you need a deal, you need the credit cards, all this kind of stuff, but they focus on closing. So then they start studying all the different techniques of how to close. And the more closes that you have, the more sales you get, or so they think. And I used to think that way in jiu-jitsu. I used to think, you know what? I'm going to focus on breaking this guy's arm. That's it. I want his right arm, and I'm going to bend it in half so hard that his great-great-grandfather is going to beg for mercy. Then I would show up and I would start sparring, and the guy would move his arm out of the way. And I'm like, crap, that is all my technique right there, gone down the drain. And then I would get tapped. Later, as you progress, you start thinking about knee bars and rear naked chokes and positioning and all this kind of stuff. And if you thought, let's just use the same analogy as closing. If you thought when you went to a tournament that I am going to try and use about 5 or 6 submission techniques on this guy, surely the more submission techniques I use, the more chances I have of actually choking this guy out or winning the match. If you use that philosophy in jiu-jitsu, and you could see it when you're sparring with a new guy, and maybe he learns some fancy chokehold or some fancy armbar or whatever it is, it's not going to work because it has to present itself. So in inbound closing, sales techniques on the phone, whatever, you have to set up the close in a certain way. And there's ways to do that by asking questions. And it's very similar. It's actually eerily similar to jiu-jitsu, because here's how I approach a match. I practice every day. Practice. What are we doing? We're practicing arm bars. We're also practicing what happens if a guy gets me in a Kimura or a bent arm bar or a knee lock or an ankle lock, or what happens if he shoots in and takes my legs and all this kind of stuff. What happens to that? So you focus on the defensive posturing for a while, and then eventually you know what to look for because you're good at defense. Now you know what to look for. So if a person is maybe he's on a cross mount on top of you, the first thing that you do when you're in jujitsu, if somebody's trying to get on top, is you turn to your side, you turn your hips. You do not lie on your back flat. If you do that, you're going to get crushed. So you need to minimize and protect yourself by just minimal movements. So you shift your hips over, turn your basically your shoulders perpendicular to the mat. That allows you to take more pressure. So in sales, if you're trying to use all these techniques and like, okay, I'm going to use the puppy dog close and all these other closes, it's not going to work because they're going to see it a mile away. If I grab for a guy's arm, he's going to move it out of the way. So instead, what I want to do is I want to pretend that I'm going for a choke or something. Then when he puts his arm up to block the choke, I now have the arm. Thank you very much for this gift. It is now gift wrapped. Thank you. And then you proceed to pop the shoulder or whatever it is. So you're actually reaching for a different part of the gi, and you're not necessarily trying to choke the guy out. If it's there, fine. It's time for him to go to sleepy town. But if you grab and then he goes to grab your wrist, you grab his wrist, now you can begin your series into an arm lock. And if that doesn't work, if somehow he counters it, then you can go into a rear naked choke, depending on how he turns his hips and all kinds of stuff. It's actually amazing how similar it is to closing, because again, if you're just telling the guy that, hey, I'm going to close you, he's going to resist right away. And if he starts feeling like this is a sales pitch and all this kind of stuff, it's not going to work on them. So you have to ask questions. You have to set it up. It's almost like a little game of chess, but like in jiu-jitsu, if I want an arm, there's a way that I can do it. I can fatigue the guy's arm ahead of time by stressing his arm out. Maybe I get on a cross mount and I'm putting pressure on him and he has to block me with that arm for 30, 40 seconds. And all I'm doing is just putting weight, constant weight on it. Now, what am I doing? I'm actually fatiguing the shoulder so that eventually when I do get that arm, he's got no more strength in his shoulder because I've been putting pressure on him to keep my weight off of him as we're scrambling. And same thing, if we're getting into a position where I put my arms around him and I'm squeezing him, the second he exhales, I squeeze a little more. Frantic, he's all frantic, and you can see the bulge in the eyes, like, oh my God, what's going on? The second he breathes out a little bit more, I just, a little more pressure, and then before you know it, the guy taps out. I didn't even use a move on him. Same thing with closing. You put pressure on the prospect, the person that you're trying to do the sale for. Totally tongue-tied right now. You have your prospect on the phone and you are in the process of making your presentation, and now you're at the pitch phase. You're at the phase where it's like, okay, if this seems to make sense to you, then you go into it. Only if they want to. If they think this program is going to work for them, then that is when you could proceed to close. And you could say something as simple, if you think it's appropriate, I would like to share with you the next steps to get into the program. All we need is your visa, your debit card, all this kind of stuff. And that's it. And we'll get you onboarded. We'll start the process. They might object and all this kind of stuff. But if you're setting it up properly throughout the whole presentation, it's going to feel like they tapped, they submitted. And more times than not, they're going to want the transaction. It doesn't have to be a bad guy thing like us versus them, salespeople versus the clients and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't have to feel that way. You should feel good about the sale at the end of the day. Your customer should feel good about the sale at the end of the day. It's a win-win. So that's why I'm fascinated with sales, because it's very relatable to jujitsu. You don't want to expose all your cards and all your tricks and everything into a presentation, but you want to be able to ask them questions so that at the end of the day, they feel like it was their idea. And that's the whole, everything I've been talking about, Inception closing. You want to be able to plant enough seeds and thoughts into their head so that they think it's their idea to go ahead with the program. And obviously, you're not selling garbage and you're not selling crap, but you're selling something that can actually help them. So I hope that helps someone out there in regards to closing more deals and all that good stuff. And it's just fun, when you memorize your script, you memorize all the objections and all this kind of stuff that can potentially come up, you can now have fun with it. There you go. So that's it for this video. I will see you in another one. Bye for now.